A rookie sailor broke protocol in the middle of a silent drill on a nuclear submarine deep beneath the Atlantic. What happened next stunned the entire crew and taught him a lesson he'd never forget. Let us know in the comments which branch of the military you admire most. The sonar room was bathed in red emergency lighting, screens glowed faintly in the dark, the only sound the quiet hum of machinery and the soft click of keyboards. The USS Indianapolis, a Virginia-class nuclear submarine, drifted silently below 700 feet of crushing Atlantic pressure, its 134-member crew locked in the middle of a silent running drill. Every crew member had a role. Every breath mattered. Commander Thomas Sullivan stood behind the sonar console, hands clasped behind his back, posture military perfect. His face, lined by 20 years beneath the sea, was unreadable, watchful, composed, and calm. His silence wasn't hesitation. It was control. 19-year-old seaman Jace Brooks sat at the secondary console, sweating. This was his second patrol. His boots were still too new. His hair was still too tidy. He had joined the Navy to prove something, to his father, to himself, but he was about to prove something entirely different. He tapped the wrong key. A soft chirp pulsed through the sonar system. "What the hell was that?" a nearby technician hissed, eyes wide. Brooks stared at the screen in disbelief. He had accidentally triggered a sonar calibration ping, an audible pulse that echoed through the water like a flare. A mistake, a breach, a potential death sentence for a vessel relying on invisibility. No one moved, no one breathed. Commander Sullivan slowly turned. "Sound control," he said quietly. "Report." Chief Technician Wallace looked pale. "Sir, unauthorized sonar ping. 1.4 seconds. Originating from secondary console." Sullivan's gaze shifted to Brooks. The room tightened. Brooks felt like he was sinking faster than the submarine itself. Sullivan didn't shout. He didn't curse. He simply walked to the control panel and pressed a button that froze all drill activity. The humming screens dimmed. The red light seemed darker. "Seaman Brooks," he said, his voice cutting through the silence, "do you understand what you just did?" I was checking gain modulation, sir. I thought—" "You thought," Sullivan interrupted. "And in that thought, you may have just handed our coordinates to a vessel we don't know, can't see, and can't stop." Brooks opened his mouth, but words failed. Sullivan didn't yell. Instead, he turned to the comms officer. "Switch to passive surveillance. Begin 360-degree acoustic scan. XO, cancel remaining drill time. We're live now." The crew obeyed instantly. Brooks sat frozen, eyes glued to his console, hands twitching. He didn't know whether to leave or stay. The air was thicker than the steel around them. Later, back in the engineering corridor, Brooks was pulled aside by Chief Petty Officer Gaines. "You've got 10 minutes to be at systems maintenance. You'll be checking every intake filter and air duct until further notice. Clear?" Brooks nodded. "Yes, Chief." As he worked, the weight of silence followed him like a shadow. The Navy didn't always punish with yelling. Sometimes it punished with distance. He wasn't spoken to in the mess hall. No one asked to swap shifts. He became invisible. 2 days passed. The sonar team picked up nothing. No signals, no pursuit. But the tension never left. Because the danger wasn't just about being found. It was about being known. Late one night, Commander Sullivan walked into the lower bay where Brooks was cleaning a coolant pipe. "Stand up," Sullivan said. Brooks stood. "You know what makes a good submariner, Seaman Brooks?" Brooks shook his head. "Fear. Not cowardice, fear. The understanding that every action has consequence. That 700 feet beneath the sea, arrogance gets people killed." Brooks looked at the floor. "I didn't mean to, sir." "I know you didn't. That's the problem." Sullivan's voice remained calm. "Intentions don't matter at this depth, only execution, and you didn't execute." Brooks swallowed hard. "Am I being sent home, sir?" Sullivan studied him. Not yet. Then he left. The next day, the sonar crew was short one man. Without ceremony, Brooks was told to report back to the station. No fanfare, just orders. He sat in the chair again, this time, hands steady. No movement without verification. No assumption. That same evening, while running passive surveillance, he noticed a faint anomaly, a low-frequency oscillation in the background. He ran it 3 times. It wasn't ocean current. It wasn't seismic. He flagged it. "Possible contact, sir," he told the tech next to him. "Unknown pattern. Might be drone noise or active sweep masked as current." The room stirred. Mackey, the sonar chief, took over. "You sure?" "No," Brooks said honestly. "But I've learned not to ignore patterns." The signal was nothing, just an echo from a drifting seismic probe. But Sullivan heard about the call. Later, he walked by Brooks' console, paused for a second and said, "Good catch." Just that. 2 words. But for Brooks, it was more than a medal. It was a beginning. The next several days passed with eerie quiet aboard the USS Indianapolis. Not because there was nothing happening, but because everyone was waiting. Waiting for something to go wrong. Waiting for a mistake to resurface. Waiting for the moment when they'd find out whether the rookie's slip had left a permanent mark on the mission. Seaman Brooks kept his head down. His movements were tighter now, more deliberate. Every button he touched, he double-checked. Every graph he analyzed, he annotated. He no longer tried to be impressive. He just tried to be right. One morning at 04:10 hours, the submarine encountered a sudden change in current. An oceanic eddy spun around the sub's trajectory like an invisible hand, pushing it slightly off course. Brooks noticed it first. Again. "Sir," he said quietly, leaning toward Mackey. "We're drifting about 0.7 knots starboard off intended vector." Mackey blinked at the numbers. "Good eye." He reported it. The course was corrected. No fuss. No alarms. But when Commander Sullivan reviewed the logs an hour later, his expression changed slightly. Not quite a smile, but something in his eyes shifted. Brooks was learning. Later that day, while standing outside the mess hall, Brooks heard his name spoken in the sonar room. Not in whispers this time, but plainly. "Brooks spotted the drift before it hit the alert threshold," someone said. "Yeah," another voice replied. "Kid's got sharper ears than we thought." That night, he sat at the edge of the mess hall with a tray of overcooked pasta and powdered milk. No one joined him, but no one avoided him either. The silence around him had changed. It wasn't isolation anymore. It was observation. The crew was watching him again, not with suspicion, but with interest. 3 days later, everything changed. The Indianapolis was running a routine silent patrol east of Bermuda, staying beneath the sonar net of nearby patrol zones. It was supposed to be a quiet night. At 0223 hours, Brooks picked up a trace on passive sonar, just a ripple. But something about it didn't feel natural. It was a low-frequency hum, brief, almost elegant. "Sir," he said to Mackey, "I'm seeing a pattern. Every 42 seconds, same frequency, same decay curve." Mackey checked the logs. "Might be wave noise bouncing off a deep trench." "No, sir," Brooks said. "This is controlled, mechanical." Commander Sullivan arrived within 3 minutes. "Report." Brooks gestured at the screen. "Repeating low-frequency pulses. Bearing 281. Estimate source is stationary or slow-moving. Not oceanographic in nature." Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "Drone?" "Possibly," Brooks said, "but not American." The word hung in the air. Sullivan didn't blink. "Full silence. Hold depth. Begin maneuvering sequence Delta Echo. Let's vanish." The room became a hive of quiet precision. The sub banked gently to port, adjusted depth by 5 meters, and reduced all propulsion noise to near zero. Lights dimmed, and still. The pulse continued. "They're scanning," Sullivan said softly. "A hostile underwater drone, perhaps autonomous, perhaps controlled by a vessel far away, was conducting a slow sonar sweep of the sector, and the Indianapolis was directly in its path. The drone passed overhead. The sonar team held their breath. Brooks stared at the waveform. 40 seconds. 30. Now, he whispered, counting the pulse intervals. Then came something unexpected. A second different signal. 2 pulses, one trailing the other. Sullivan turned to Brooks. What does that mean? Brooks tapped his console. They're overlapping. The drone's not alone. There's a manned vessel controlling it, or at least watching. Sullivan nodded once. All right, let's find out who's watching us. He ordered a controlled ascent, just 20 feet, to get better hydroacoustic range. The sonar team pushed the gain. A faint return appeared, roughly 3,000 meters north, a shadow. It wasn't clear what it was. No transponder, no identifiable acoustic signature. But it was there. They didn't pursue it. They didn't engage. They just watched. And then, without warning, it was gone. No ping, no pulse, just silence. Sullivan stood there for several minutes, staring at the sonar screen. Mark last contact location, he said finally, and scrubbed the tapes. Everyone knew what that meant. Do not log this encounter in the main report. It was officially invisible. The next day, while Brooks was calibrating the sonar again, Mackey approached him. You handled that well last night. Brooks nodded. Still wish I hadn't made that first mistake. You learned from it. That's what matters. Then, almost as an afterthought, Mackey added, not many rookies get to help spot hostile drone ops their first tour and live to tell about it. Brooks smiled faintly. The days that followed were calm, but the tension never fully faded. Something about the encounter had left a mark, not just on Brooks, but on the entire crew. They had looked into the dark and been seen. When they returned to base 2 weeks later, debriefing was swift. The drone incident wasn't mentioned, as instructed, but the crew knew, and they talked, quietly, in corridors and barracks, about the sonar, about the pattern, about the kid who'd spotted it first. Brooks was summoned to Sullivan's office. He stood at attention. At ease, Sullivan said. Sit. Brooks sat. I've reviewed your logs and Mackey's report. Yes, sir. Sullivan opened a drawer and pulled out a single sheet. This is your transfer recommendation. Advanced Sonar Training Program. It'll be a grind. More math than most humans should be subjected to. You interested? Brooks's eyes widened. Yes, sir, absolutely. Sullivan stood. You made a mistake, but you took ownership. That matters, more than you know. Brooks stood and saluted. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me, Sullivan said, walking back to the console. Just be ready. Next time, it might not be a drone. As Brooks walked out, he passed the sonar room. He paused, looking at the red glow behind the glass. The same chair, the same console, but a different man. He walked on, quiet, steady, and no longer the rookie who broke the silence. The days aboard the USS Indianapolis had taken on a new rhythm. The mission had entered its third phase, a deep surveillance operation near a disputed maritime boundary in the eastern Mediterranean. The sub was now operating under extreme stealth conditions. Lights dimmed to their lowest settings, only whispers allowed during shift changes. Even the mess hall reduced to hand gestures and nods. And at the heart of the mission, sitting behind a softly glowing sonar screen, was Petty Officer Seaman Jace Brooks. He no longer felt like a rookie. He wasn't treated like one either. He rotated shifts with Mackey, now trusted to run sonar patterns solo during low-traffic windows. And while the burden still weighed on him, every blip, every flicker a potential threat, he had learned to channel that pressure into precision. The crew had warmed. A nod from Chief Wallace here, a quiet joke from Reyes there, and even Commander Sullivan, once unreadable and cold, had adopted a subtle familiarity in tone when giving Brooks his shift orders. Still, Everything remained on edge. Their orders were clear: observe without being observed. Several NATO vessels had reported aggressive sonar sweeps from unidentified vessels just days earlier. The waters were tense. A mistake now wouldn't just jeopardize the Indianapolis. It could light a spark the world wasn't ready for. Then it happened. At 0217 hours, while running standard passive scans, Brooks noticed an anomaly. Not a sound, but the absence of one. "There's a drop," he said quietly to Mackey. "Sector 212, no traffic, no weather anomaly, just silence." Mackey frowned. "Dead zone?" Brooks shook his head. "No, something's absorbing." Commander Sullivan was summoned. They examined the data. It wasn't just a gap, it was suppression. Something was actively jamming acoustic reflections. Brooks leaned closer to his console, narrowing the scope, reducing signal gain. And then, faintly, it appeared. A shadow, triangular, moving slowly. A vessel, but not one they could identify. It didn't ping, it didn't communicate, it absorbed. Sullivan's expression didn't change. But he ordered an immediate descent of 20 meters and initiated ghost mode, a protocol rarely used. It involved rerouting power through tertiary systems to eliminate all unnecessary heat and noise emissions. It made the sub virtually invisible and equally vulnerable if discovered. The shadow moved closer. Brooks monitored every microdecibel on the hydrophone input. His screen read like the pulse of a sleeping giant, calm but unpredictable. The shadow passed within 200 meters of their hull, then stopped. For a full 7 minutes, the crew barely breathed. Then, it moved on, slowly, deliberately, westward. The silence that followed was thick with meaning. Sullivan finally spoke. "We're not the only ones down here playing silent games." He turned to Brooks. "Log everything, but don't flag it for external report. I want this sealed under command clearance." Brooks nodded, knowing exactly what that meant. This wasn't just about mission confidentiality, it was about politics. The kind of knowledge that could shift global balance if leaked. After the shift, Brooks returned to the berthing bay and lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. It wasn't fear he felt, it was responsibility. He had seen something few would ever know existed. Not on a map, not in the press, only in the dark. The next day, during systems check, an auxiliary power fault triggered a minor circuit failure in Engineering Bay 3. Nothing critical, but enough to set off a quiet alarm. Chief Reyes barked for a repair team. Brooks was sent along to assist. Inside the tight compartment, surrounded by pipework and control boxes, Brooks traced the malfunction to a coolant relay jammed with salt crystal buildup. A fixable issue, but one that raised questions. The compartment was supposed to be hermetically sealed. "How'd salt get in here?" Brooks asked aloud. Reyes paused, wiped sweat from his brow. "Good question. They cleaned it, logged the maintenance, and sealed the relay again. But something about it didn't sit right with Brooks. That night, during sonar maintenance, he ran a quick systems diagnostic, not on sonar, but on internal airflow sensors. He wasn't supposed to, but he had access now. What he found made his stomach twist. One of the ballast intakes had logged an unregistered depressurization 6 days prior, for less than 30 seconds. It hadn't triggered an alert, barely a blip, but it had happened. He cross-referenced the log with sonar records from the same night, and there it was. A short burst of sonar silence, followed by the first trace of the now-vanished shadow vessel. Someone, or something, had tampered with their systems from outside, briefly, silently, and left no trace. Brooks took the data straight to Commander Sullivan. The captain said nothing for a long moment. He reviewed the timestamp, the airflow logs, the sonar overlays. Then he said, "You're not wrong." He leaned forward. "This doesn't leave this room." "Yes, sir." Sullivan stood and walked to the door, closing it. "We may have been tagged," he said. "Not fired on, not scanned, tagged, like an animal." Brooks's eyes widened. "You mean tracked?" "Possibly." Sullivan looked directly at him. "This is why we train with silence. This is why your mistake mattered. Not because it broke a rule, but because down here, someone is always listening." Brooks felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. The mission concluded 3 days later. The Indianapolis surfaced off the coast of Sicily, her black hull splitting the ocean like a phantom returning from the dead. The crew disembarked in silence, not from shame, but from reverence, for what they'd seen and what they couldn't speak of. During debriefing, Brooks kept his answers short, professional, specific. Nothing about the tag, nothing about the shadow. After all, some stories belonged only to the deep. As the crew dispersed to shore leave, Brooks stayed behind. He walked the length of the dock, back to the edge of the water, where the submarine lay anchored like a resting leviathan. Sullivan appeared beside him, hands behind his back. "You ever wonder," the commander said, "how many things we don't know are down there?" "All the time, sir." Sullivan nodded. "Good. Stay curious. But never forget, curiosity without caution is just a countdown." Brooks didn't reply. He didn't need to. They stood in silence, two men joined not by rank, but by understanding. Then Sullivan walked away, and Brooks, no longer a boy, no longer just a sailor, watched the sea and listened. The USS Indianapolis underwent standard dry dock maintenance at Naval Station Rota in Spain. Its hull scraped clean, systems recalibrated, and crew rotated through rest periods and refresh briefings. But for those who had been aboard during the Mediterranean patrol, the men who had felt the pressure of 700 feet of saltwater silence, there was no standard anymore. Something had changed. For Petty Officer Seaman Jace Brooks, the world above sea level felt artificial. The sunlight too bright, the voices too loud, the ground too soft. On land, mistakes came with second chances. Underwater, there was no rewind, only survival. And it was under that weight that Brooks found himself called into a closed-door review with Rear Admiral Keegan, a decorated fleet officer overseeing all Atlantic stealth patrols. He wore no smile. His questions were surgical. "You ran sonar on the night of March 14th? "Yes, sir." "You recorded an unidentified acoustic profile?" "Yes, sir." "Logged it?" "Through internal command channels only, sir." "Why?" "Per Commander Sullivan's orders." Keegan leaned back, folding his hands. "What did you see?" Brooks hesitated. He'd gone over this in his mind a dozen times, but the Admiral's gaze stripped away all his prepared answers. "I saw something that didn't want to be seen, sir." "And knew how to make sure it wouldn't be heard either." Keegan nodded slightly. "You've been recommended for advanced acoustic warfare training." Brooks's breath caught in his chest. "You're not being rewarded," Keegan continued. "You're being weaponized. Make no mistake, what you heard out there, it'll happen again, and next time, someone might not walk away." Brooks straightened in his seat. "Yes, sir." Dismissed. That night, back in his temporary barracks, Brooks stared out the window overlooking the harbor. The Indianapolis sat quietly under the moonlight, its sail casting a shadow across the water like a watchful eye. The next mission came sooner than expected. Not combat, not surveillance. A war games drill off the coast of Iceland. Multiple subs, joint fleet involvement, simulated hostilities. Brooks was reassigned to the USS Polaris, a newer vessel with a sharper profile and a tougher crew. Commander Sullivan had personally approved the transfer. Before boarding, they met one last time, at a concrete bench near the base's chapel. "You're not who you were when you came aboard," Sullivan said, without looking at him. "No, sir. That's not always a good thing. This life, it's not for everyone." "I know." Sullivan finally looked over. "But it is for you. Just don't try to prove anything. Just listen. The ocean will teach you more than I ever could." Brooks nodded. Then he boarded the Polaris. The crew was skeptical of him at first. He was young, quiet, not exactly the chest-beating type that usually walked into advanced sonar positions. But then came the drill. Simulated enemy vessels. Simulated stealth. But a very real storm in the Atlantic threw the entire scenario into chaos. Comms were down, sonar clarity was poor, and the Polaris, unbeknownst to even its own command, had drifted into the path of one of the simulation's hostile units, a fast attack sub running hot. Everyone assumed it was part of the drill. Everyone, except Brooks. From the faint reverberations, off-sync, too sharp, he could tell the signatures weren't fake. He ran a private check, cross-referenced real-time reflections against the simulation data, and realized with dread the incoming vessel wasn't in the simulation manifest. He went straight to the bridge. "Sir, this isn't a drill contact. This is real." Commander Fitz on the Polaris narrowed his eyes. "Explain." Brooks laid out the echo curve. "No simulated ping behaves like this. It's using a layered frequency. This is a foreign sub, possibly trailing us under the guise of the exercise." Fitz took a long look at the data, then tapped the ship-wide PA. "All hands, drill suspended. Begin stealth protocol. Lock systems." The Polaris went dark. Within minutes, the unknown vessel veered off. No confrontation, but a message sent. They could have been exposed. When the exercise ended and truth caught up, a review confirmed it. An actual submarine from a foreign navy had used the cover of the NATO drill to get dangerously close to multiple vessels. Brooks had been the only one to notice. He didn't brag. He didn't celebrate. He just added the event to his growing mental ledger of things the surface world would never understand. By the time the Polaris returned to port, word had spread. Brooks had gone from the kid who broke protocol to the guy who hears things nobody else does. Weeks later, during a ceremony aboard the Indianapolis, Commander Sullivan spoke privately with Brooks. "You know what they used to call sonar techs back in the day?" Sullivan asked, hands in his pockets. Brooks shook his head. "Ghost whisperers." Brooks smiled. "That sounds about right." Sullivan gestured toward the sub. "This isn't just steel and circuits, it's alive. And it listens. If you respect her, she'll carry you through the worst storms. If you get arrogant, she'll remind you who's in charge." Brooks finished. They stood there for a while, saying nothing, just watching the sea roll in. Because some lessons don't need to be spoken. Some lessons are learned 700 feet beneath the surface, alone, afraid, and listening to the ocean breathe. On land, mistakes are lessons. Underwater, mistakes can be death sentences. Discipline in the Navy isn't optional. It's oxygen. What would you have done in Commander Sullivan's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story left an impression, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell icon. More stories of honor, silence, and the sea are coming soon. From Authority Watch.